We're moving to file item 11, that's ACR 67. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 67 by Assemblymember Mullin and others relative to ballot measures.
Mr. David Chu, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. On behalf of the 5 joint authors of this resolution, including our Speaker Pro Tem, Mr. Mullin, we ask everyone to support ACR 67. This resolution states that the California State Legislature formally denounces and opposes a proposed ballot initiative that urges the most extreme violence and harm upon our LGBT communities. Mr. Speaker, permission to read?
Without objection.
The so-called Sodomite Suppression Act declares that LGBT individuals ought to, quote, be put to death by bullets in the head or by any other convenient method. This measure would also bar gays and lesbians or anyone who supports the LGBT community from holding government jobs or public office or receiving any government benefits. It's disturbing that we're even having this discussion. Our resolution states that while the legislature affirms the right to free speech, it is abhorrent and repulsive that someone would call for the mass execution and intimidation based on a personal characteristic which is inherent and unchangeable. This ballot measure is completely antithetical to the principles of a civilized society. ACR 67 also states that this ballot measure reminds us of the actions inflicted on innocent people throughout history. While we celebrate LGBT Pride this month with the pink triangle symbol, we must not forget that the pink triangle was first used to mark gays and lesbians in concentration camps as tens of thousands were put to death. Stonewall was a reaction to violent police raids of LGBT establishments. In my city, even elected officials must pass through City Hall metal detectors because of San Francisco's history of the assassination of Supervisor Harvey Milk, the first LGBT elected in California, killed with 2 bullets to the head. This past decade, the FBI has reported thousands of hate crimes against LGBT individuals, and in recent years, almost half of all transgender youth have been physically abused in schools. I want to thank the Judiciary Committee for its unanimous bipartisan support of this measure. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I hope that all 80 of us can go on record in support of this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Thurmond, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of this resolution that speaks out against any measure that would propagate hate and violence. You know, our courts have repeatedly spoken out against those rulings that would get into the business of consenting adults and have said that those very rulings are unconstitutional. As recent as last week, we have seen the kind of damage and harm and hurt and tragedy that hate can provide when people speak out against a group because of their race, their sexual orientation, or even their religion. Instead, I would implore us to look to those rulings like Loving that said that our court upholds the right of an individual to love whoever they choose to, and that as long as they're consenting adults, to love whoever they choose to do. And that instead, we avoid anything that will propagate hate and will advocate violence. Instead, that we enforce practices and policy that focuses on tolerance, on understanding, and promoting love. I urge support of this ACR.
Ms. Eggman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise as the chair of the LGBT caucus and also as a co-author of this, just to say that we must stand up against hate speech wherever and whenever we see it. We know that one of the people we honored here today was our first time we've honored an ally, because somebody who stood up with us and for us to try to proclaim a Pride Month and was virtually demoted from her office of mayor down to council member, and the resolution was revoked. We know that kind of hate speech leads to this kind of thing, being somebody thinks that it's okay to put on our ballot. We must stand anytime any kind of hate speech occurs, and especially when it invokes people to violence simply for being who we are. I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Ting, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also wanted to thank you for bringing this resolution forward. I also wanted to join my colleague from San Francisco to quote Dr. King, who said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." So I think that's even more important when abhorrent words come forward, when we have a community that's under attack, when we actually have hate speech, but also violence that's incited, incurred, that we speak, but that we speak not as a divided house, but really as a united house. So I really urge all of us to go up to support this ACR so we can send a message, as my colleague from Irvine said, to make sure that we stand absolutely against violence, absolutely against hate speech, and that we stand together as one community. Thank you.
Mr. Lowe, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. I also rise in support of this resolution. You know, some of our colleagues have mentioned on this floor about giving too much attention and time to this issue. But I would remind my colleagues that this has happened many times before as it relates to civil rights issues. Silence is acceptance. This is the civil rights issue of our time. And if we don't stand up and acknowledge this, California leads in the nation. California leads in the world. And we will continue to be leaders in civil rights for all people and not accept this hate speech. This is why we're here, to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California. I urge your I vote.